Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you live on Truth Frequency Radio and simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. Your hosts are Patrick and Catherine Andrews.
Join us each week as we explore a wide range of metaphysical topics such as dreams, astrology, intuitive readings, and life purpose. You'll receive practical guidance so that you can live your most awesome life.
Learn more about what we do at intuitiveschool.com and connect with us on Facebook at Spirit's Journey Radio. Welcome to Spirit's Journey, coming to you on Truth Frequency Radio. We are also being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. You can find us on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and TalkStream Live. We're here in the Heartland holding the energy for spiritual truth and awareness. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Catherine. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited about the show today because we have a homeopathic physician, Ananda Moore, with us today. And I'm a big fan of homeopathy. It's cured me of so many things. I've used it with my daughter. It's fantastic. So we're going to have an amazing conversation today. Ananda Moore actually graduated from honors from the Ontario College of Homeopathic Medicine in 2005. She's studied with Suni Anand in India. She's volunteered at homeopathic hospitals as well in Chennai, India. And on her return to Toronto, she started practicing and eventually purchased the Riverdale Homeopathy Center, where now she is currently in the Homeopathic Master Clinician's course. In 2007, she did that. And so on today's show, we're also going to be talking about Ananda's latest documentary, Magic Pills, Promise or Placebo. So welcome, Ananda.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, as I said, I'm such a fan of homeopathy, and I'm so grateful of all the wonderful work you're doing with that. And so I'm curious, what led you to become a homeopathic physician?
You know, I was very, very, very skeptical of homeopathy to begin with. I had learned about homeopathy in a course in university, and the course was on witchcraft and the occult, which was a strange place to learn about homeopathy, but that's what they pooled it in with. And the way it was taught, it made it sound like it was completely preposterous, this idea that you could take a substance, dilute it until there was nothing left, and then give that to people as medicine. And it actually made me really angry to hear that people were so gullible that they would do this. Years later, after I graduated from university, I was backpacking in India, and I got very sick. And coincidentally, this girl I was traveling with, her mother was a homeopath, so she had a complete homeopathic kit. And she picked out some little pellets and gave them to me. And very quickly, I started to feel much better. And I was really surprised. And this place I was in India, I wasn't the only person that was sick that day. There were other people there. And people were sick for a few days. And I had only been sick for like a half hour. So it kind of opened my eyes. And eventually, I went to see a homeopath to deal with other health issues I was having. And I really was blown away when it helped treat a lifelong case of depression. And from there on, I decided to change my career track, and I went to study homeopathy. I became quite excited about the possibilities and how we can help people.
That's interesting. I think most people, once they try homeopathy, they're amazed. And that's actually what got me more involved in homeopathics in terms of just taking the remedies. I was in my 20s and I was living in California at the time, and I had always pursued natural health as opposed to, the typical Western. And so I went to see a homeopathic physician, and anyway, we, had our consultation, and he gave me a remedy, and he said, take it tonight. Well, I'm telling you, the next morning, my condition was completely cured that fast, and it never returned again. And so from that day, I have been telling everybody that I meet about the wonders of homeopathy. So I think once people try it, they're sold on it, basically.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes I'm going to just be honest here. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes the remedy they took wasn't the right one to help them, or they didn't give it enough time or enough of a chance. Sometimes it's not the first remedy and you have to try other things. And sometimes the healing is so subtle that people don't even notice that their symptoms are gone. And so I want to encourage people out there who maybe have tried homeopathy once and it didn't work for them, not to give up, that it doesn't always work the first time.
So most people probably don't even realize that Western medicine is actually referred to as allopathy. And so how is homeopathy different from allopathy?
Well, the term allopathy specifically means working against, so different pathology, and homeopathy means similar pathology. So the goal of homeopathy is to work with the body. And what we do is we look for a medicine that causes symptoms in a healthy person that match the symptoms that someone who is unwell is experiencing. Where with allopathy or conventional medicine, we're looking for something that's going to antagonize the body system. So we have antibiotics, antihistamines, antipyretics. The idea is to block the whatever biological pathway in order to stop the symptom. Where our work is to stimulate the immune system to heal what's going on rather than to cover it up.
And the one thing I love about homeopathy is that they love symptoms. They're like, symptoms are great. It shows that your body is actually still healthy enough to respond, right? And so homeopathy is, in my understanding, is that it can bring up the symptoms. So it might be a little bit worse right after you take the remedy because the symptoms are coming up, but then they quickly cancel out.
Yeah, something like that. We believe that as the immune system gets weaker, or the vital force gets weaker, that the ability of the body to present with strong symptoms starts to reduce. So that's where we see that fewer symptoms can mean more chronic pathology. So for example, we believe that when someone doesn't have fevers, that can be, or strong fevers, that can be a bad sign that their immune system isn't activating when it needs to activate.
So can you walk us through what it would be like to go to a homeopath for a typical visit?
A lot of people think it feels a lot like going to a therapist because we're not only looking at your physical symptoms, which are very important to us, but we also want to understand mental and emotional aspects that affect your pathology or your state, because we believe that the body is interconnected, and sometimes whatever is happening in the body reflects on the mind and the emotional. So for example, we ask a lot people, how does that make you feel? It makes you angry. What does angry mean to you? Because so many of us can experience anger in a different way. I want to understand how people respond to the world and reflect on the world. And that helps me get to a good constitutional remedy. So a constitutional remedy is one that addresses the whole person versus an acute remedy, which we give for specific acute symptoms like a cold, a fever, an ear infection, that sort of thing. And the constitutional treatment is where we go more for chronic pathology.
Wow, it seems like that would be really complex for you as a homeopathic physician.
It's not easy. I often spend 2 hours with a patient, and then I can spend several hours if it's a difficult case trying to find the right remedy for them. Absolutely.
Well, that doesn't really fit with the office plan for a lot of doctors' offices. I was actually an office manager for a friend of ours who was a chiropractor and an acupuncturist for a while, and she went to a seminar. They were training her how to structure their office, and the goal was to only spend 3 minutes with each patient.
Wow. And I thought it was bad here where they do 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 3, 5. Well, I think that's, such what people are wanting, because so many people are upset when they say, oh, my doctor didn't listen to me. And I know when I had my first encounter with the homeopathic physician, it was amazing. So I was like, wow, 2 hours. I did feel like I had a therapy session in addition to getting a remedy. I know the homeopathic physician I worked with said they don't even do phone consultations because they actually, when they're in the presence of somebody, it actually helps them understand the person better and they're more able to pick a correct remedy. Is that something that you also do, is the in-person as opposed to, just phone?
Well, luckily we have some great technology now, so I can use things like Zoom, VC to be able to see my patients. And that helps a lot. So I would say about 50% of my practice is actually international.
Oh, fascinating.
And facilitated by these great apps we have now. So yeah, I mean, there are some people who aren't comfortable with it, but I feel that I get very good results and I can still connect with a person. But if it's just over the phone, it's very difficult. You can't see a person's facial expressions. You don't connect with them in the same way.
Yeah. So I loved the movie Magic Pills. I totally recommend everybody go out and see it. It is simply amazing. And so I want to focus in on your movie a little bit and ask you what prompted you to make that movie?
I was very, very frustrated with the very limited perspective that we were hearing in the general media and the mainstream media regarding homeopathy. They really harp on this idea that there is no evidence to support homeopathy, that its main premise is unscientific. And if you actually look and take a read through the scientific literature, you'll find that's actually far from true. And we have many meta-analyses. We have 5 out of 6 meta-analyses that have been done on the subject matter show that homeopathy actually works. So, I mean, we still have a ways to go with research and evidence, but to say that it's unscientific is just a lie. And I kept hearing this over and over again. And I kept seeing how the media was misrepresenting, particularly me. I had 2 situations where I was interviewed for major publications in Canada, and they right out lied about the research I gave them. They published that the research I had given them hadn't been published in peer-reviewed journals, which was such a fallacy. I had actually provided them photocopies from the peer-reviewed journals themselves. And it really dawned on me that these gatekeepers to knowledge, these people who are telling the general public how to think about science and medicine and health, they themselves don't really have any knowledge as to how to understand these subjects. They're scientifically illiterate, and yet they're trying to tell us how to think about science.
So do you think the reporters in that instance had an agenda?
I do. I think in one instance, the reporter, from the way I had been fact-checked, it seemed like it had been a completely different article than what was finally published. And I think the original writer had given the subject a really good equal time on both sides of the issue. But then the editor went and just destroyed the article. So I think a lot of it happens on the editorial side. The other one with the walrus, I definitely think it was the journalist. And, you know, she was asked, she came to me to talk about what we call homeoprophylaxis and using homeopathy in disease prevention, which we discuss in the film as it happened in Cuba. They stopped over 7 epidemics in Cuba. The biggest intervention they did was, I think, 8 million people. And they had incredible results each time. And so they came to me to talk about homeoprophylaxis, and instead it became all about my own children and that I was this helicopter mother and my personal choices at home. So it was very frustrating that it felt like I'd been set up.
Oh, how disappointing. Well, yeah, so I loved the part in the movie where you went to Cuba, you traveled there, you went to the Finlay Institute, and showed how they were making their own remedies for, I believe it was leptospirosis, was after they had some hurricanes, was running rampant on the island. And they used a homeopathic campaign, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was also part of what brought me to the film. I was at a conference where Dr. Gustavo Bracho from the Finlay Institute, who is an immunologist, his main job at the Finlay Institute was producing vaccines. And he worked on this incredible intervention where the Finlay Institute is the only pharmacy in the world that makes a human vaccine for leptospirosis. And leptospirosis is a bacteria that spreads when there's flooding and a lot of water. And it can even spread through what looks like intact skin. The smallest injury can bring the bacteria into your body. And it's very dangerous. It has a fatality rate of up to 10% of people. And it's hard to diagnose because it looks like so many other diseases. So what was happening is in 2007, the east coast of Cuba was hit by a very strong tropical storm and hurricane. And they didn't have enough vaccine for the population. They had enough for less than 1% or 0.1% of the population. And they had been experimenting a little bit with homeopathy, and they thought, well, we've got nothing to lose. Let's see if we isolate the bacteria that is currently rampant in that part of the island and make a homeopathic remedy out of it. What can go wrong? At least we won't hurt anybody. Let's see what happens. And their team got out doses to 2.3 million people. And within 2 weeks, they had stopped the epidemic. They were absolutely shocked to find that the levels of the disease actually plummeted below historical levels. And the following year, the entire island was hit by three hurricanes. It was one of the worst years on record for them. And where most of the island actually had an increase in leptospirosis, it went up over 20%. The eastern provinces, where the year previous had the homeopathic intervention, the rates dropped more than 80%.
And what I find so fascinating about it is that it's so inexpensive to make and yet so powerful. And I remember years ago, I watched a documentary where they were interviewing a doctor in China, and he basically used herbs for treating his patients. And the interviewer said, well, why don't you use, we've got all this new technology, MRI machines, on and on and on. Why don't you use that? And his simple answer, he just laughed. He said, it's too expensive. And, and really these natural remedies that cost pennies on the dollar compared to, all these medications, and they work better with no side effects.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's why we've been such a threat to the medical system. There is such an attack against homeopathy globally right now. They're using fraudulent science to try and uphold these ideas that there's no evidence for natural medicine whatsoever. Homeopathy has been taken off the national health system in the UK. Australia has removed support for natural medicine, including homeopathy. And now we see the FDA in the US making a very concerted effort to reduce access to homeopathy by forcing homeopathic remedies to go through the new drug approval program. I can talk more about that. I don't know if you want to continue with the film, but I think that's a really important issue and something that people in the States can really get involved with right now.
Oh, no, I would definitely like to go along that path, because I had no idea that the FDA was trying to limit that. It's like, don't take away my homeopathy. So what can we do? And tell us,
So to begin with, the FDA was actually founded by a homeopath, which is like mind-blowing. And so homeopathy was considered safe and was grandfathered into the FDA. So it was always, in a way, regulated by the FDA. Until December 2017, the FDA released this document that was going to change all of that. Very thankfully, this incredible woman, Paula Brown, who had used homeopathy to cure some debilitating interstitial cystitis, she was outraged and couldn't believe that they were threatening to remove her access to homeopathy. And she found other moms who were in the same boat. They created an organization called Americans for Homeopathy Choice. And you can do a Google search for that, Americans for Homeopathy Choice, and you can find their website. They're working with an incredible attorney, Jim Turner, who has a lot of experience in Washington. And it's thanks to him, actually, that acupuncture is legal in the US. And with his support, they've really been able to put a wrench in the FDA's plans and really stall their process. They've put in petitions that the FDA can't continue with ratifying this document until they address all the issues in this petition. They have been meeting regularly with the FDA, and they now have some support from a few Congress people. So things are really moving forward, and I want to encourage everyone to visit their website, donate. They're completely volunteer run, and they really need help and support, and join their newsletter. You'll learn what you can do on a day-to-day basis to support them.
The thing that really infuriates me is that right here in the United States, we're supposed to be the bastion of free will in the world where people have a right to choose their own path. And yet there's this element within the United States that is trying to take away our choice for natural health care, and then, force us all down this path of medication, which I believe there are fundamental flaws in the entire allopathic philosophy that a lot of people, they don't recognize. There's a lot of people in the population, I think, that aren't educated enough to understand what they're presenting, to understand that they aren't presenting valid arguments. And then there's this element that is motivated by greed and profit that is trying to eliminate anything that isn't super expensive. So they're trying to get people hooked on these medications for the rest of their lives, and just have this constant stream of money coming in.
And they attack through ridicule. They try to discredit. And it works so well, especially when there's only one voice being heard on the radio and on TV and in the newspapers. When you don't see another perspective, you start to believe what you're hearing, and that they're quacks, they're unscientific. It's like when we have doctors here who try to speak up for their beliefs, if they're not aligned with the college or with the association, it can be very disruptive to their lives and their practice. So we're silencing people across the board and really trying to control people's autonomy over their bodies and their health, and it's very disturbing.
Well, one thing that I think is a ray of hope is that we actually knew one of the attorneys when we lived in Chicago who was working on the case, and actually he was not supporting the chiropractors. He was on the other side, but he was telling us all about the case that actually established the credibility of chiropractic and then opened the door for chiropractic to be included in a lot of insurance plans. So there was a time when, they were trying to shut down the chiropractors. And like you said, acupuncture is becoming more available and accepted in this country. And a lot of that, I think, is because people were able to establish scientific evidence that had credibility.
Absolutely. But you can't patent it. It's very affordable. They can't make a fortune on it. So they need to protect their interests.
Well, that's one thing that people don't realize too, is a lot of times they'll find a natural remedy in a plant or something like that, and then they will reduce it down to its chemical components so that they can actually patent it. They can synthesize it and then patent it. People don't realize that they could take the natural plant and it would actually be probably healthier for them because it's got all the natural buffers of the plant in there.
Exactly.
Well, and it's so interesting because I'm fascinated by the originator of homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann. And, if you were listening to us talk today, he'd probably be just like, scratching his head, because I know back in his days in the 1800s, people were getting arrested if they had if they were found to have homeopathic remedies in their home. Students of his were ridiculed. And it's like, wait, we're doing the same thing again.
Yeah, he not much has changed in some ways since his days, but I actually feel a little embarrassed that I didn't know that I haven't heard that people are getting arrested for having remedies. What did start that I do know about the history of Hahnemann, he got very frustrated with the pharmaceutical or the small pharmacies back then. Like, he would write a prescription and he wasn't sure that the pharmacies were actually producing the homeopathic remedies as they should. And he started writing fake prescriptions of substances that didn't exist and seeing what the pharmacist would do with it. And when his patient would come back with this made-up remedy, he decided he didn't want to work with the pharmacies anymore and that he was going to start making his own remedies. And he recommended all his students and homeopaths around that they do the same thing. And that was the beginning of the battle between the pharmaceutical industry and homeopathy. and they came after him very strongly. He lost his license in different cities or regions of Germany. He had to leave where he lived several times because of that, and eventually he ended up in France. But even from that point, he recognized the corruption, and I don't think he'd be surprised at seeing the state of things today.
Well, it's interesting that the corruption goes that far back.
I know, it's like, oh my gosh. And but the cool thing is, at the end of his life, like you said, he was practicing in Paris, and I was reading that they would have lines a mile long waiting to get in to see him. He was curing people with the plague, and better than the medical doctors. And anyway, he's got just a fascinating story. So
someone needs to make a movie. I think his story is incredible, and his wife's as well. So yeah,
I'm working on that.
Yeah, funny you should mention that. Well, we're approaching the bottom of the hours, so we will be going into a short break. And during the break, please visit our Spirits Journey page on tfrlive.com. You can support the station and Spirits Journey, and TFR is a listener-supported station, so 50% of your contributions go to Spirits Journey and 50% go to Truth Frequency Radio to help continue our cutting-edge information on health and spiritual development. This is Spirits Journey on Truth Frequency Radio, being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. We'll see you on the other side.
Welcome to the Self-Ascension Classroom, affordable and beautiful home study for your mystical journey. Imagine the gift of studying everything that you've ever wanted at home and on your time. Yes, it is possible, and there is so much to choose from as you dive into your home study experience. Remember that with every moment you spend studying this gift, you ignite your divinity. Imagine the mysteries of the Tohil and the crystalline clarity and radiant abundance of Vesa, a mastery balancing technique and certification process, and then cosmic life regression. Travel the universe and remember. Allow yourself the gift of navigating the inner matrix. This beautiful Ascended Mastery program of the Violet Flame will take you to places you may not have dared to dream to go, and then you will rediscover the true gift of your divine nature. Yes, the time is now to study the ancient mysteries, and it's so easy to begin. Discover the Self-Ascension Classroom only at Sri&Kira.com. That's Sri&Kira.com. Namaste.
Welcome back from the break. If you were just joining us, this is Spirits Journey with Patrick and Catherine Andrews, coming to you live from Truth Frequency Radio, being simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio.
We are here today with the homeopathic physician Ananda Moore, talking about her movie Magic Pills, Promise or Placebo, and talking just about in general what's going on with censorship and homeopathics. It's just fascinating. And so going back to the movie, Ananda, you also traveled to India and you actually studied with one of the homeopathic physicians from India. So can you share a little about what's going on with homeopathy in India?
Sure. So, India is probably the most open country on the planet to homeopathy and has become very, very supportive of it. When the new prime minister came in, actually not too long before I went to film there, Modi, he felt that the medical system wasn't paying enough attention to the natural medicines. And he decided to create a new ministry, which was called the Ministry of Ayush. And Ayush is an acronym for Ayurveda, yoga. I always forget some of the Indian medicines, Unami, something like that. S is Siddha, and H was homeopathy. So India has excellent homeopathic medical schools. They have homeopathic hospitals across the country. Some of them are incredibly modern and well-equipped. Every hospital has both allopathic and homeopathic doctors working together. And it's incredible to see. I originally filmed, or what we see in the film is in Calcutta, two very prominent doctors, the Banerjees, Dr. Prateep and Dr. Prasanta, who have become world famous for their cancer protocols. And what's incredible are specifically their cancer protocols for brain tumors, in which they have very, very high success rates, where Western medicine has a very high failure rate in treating brain tumors. It's basically a death sentence in most countries. In India, when you have access to this alternative medicine, your chances of survival are much, much higher. And I got to meet some incredible patients of his. There was one patient who we interview in the film who, went through chemo and it destroyed his life. He was bedridden and his brain tumor kept growing and growing. He lost the ability to walk, to feed himself. And he finally decided, I can't do this anymore. And he called the Banerjees, who came to take care of him. And the brain tumor shrunk considerably. He regained his ability to walk. He actually came with me to the premiere of the film in Sedona. So he traveled from India to the States, which just shows you how far he's come. It's quite amazing. But the other thing that's really impressive in India is, even to this day, right now, I'm reading articles about how there's government programs for disease prevention, and they're using primarily homeopathy, which is dispersed for free for anyone who wants it. So when we went to film in India, we also went to Andhra Pradesh, where they stopped Japanese encephalitis there using homeopathy over a period of years. And they gave 20 million children the homeopathic remedies to prevent this illness. And the rates at one point the disease had disappeared from the state. It was quite phenomenal.
So do you think the success and, just the openness to use homeopathy in India has anything to do with the fact that there's such deep spiritual roots in India? There's such a focus on gurus, spirituality, meditation, all that comes from there. Do you think because just the energy of that country is, more in touch with the soul, or whatever you want to call it, that they can recognize something like a vibrational medicine like homeopathy?
That could be a factor. They're also very scientifically strong there as well. They've made incredible discoveries. Even to one doctor in the film, Dr. Jayesh Ballare, found nanoparticles in high homeopathic dilutions, proving that they're not just water. So they're very strong on both sides. And I also think they have a long-standing tradition that was never suppressed of natural medicine. And it's been integrated in hospitals and supported just the way allopathic medicine was. And additionally, India actually tends to withstand the pressures of pharmaceutical lobbying quite strongly. And they have a record of standing up to pharmaceutical companies, where in other countries they would have taken the bribes and let the pharmaceuticals do whatever they've wanted. So there's a few things in play there. And I was reading an article the other day, something like 89% of parents in India believe in homeopathy or something like that.
That's amazing. Oh, Well, my husband and I always talk, Patrick and I, that, we try to stay positive despite the censorship going on and pharmaceuticals trying to take over, because we say, well, there'll always be a place in the world where we can go to get natural medicine and have freedom. And so maybe India will be the Mecca for naturopaths and we'll all gravitate there. There's always going to be an energy that's open to that. So that is very encouraging.
Mm-hmm. And actually with the closure of a lot of the research in Cuba, we have more and more opening up in India and more opportunity there for good research and well-funded research.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I thought that this was actually in your movie, but when it brought up the idea of nanoparticles, that's a field that's actually an emerging field. So we are just learning about that. I think that has a lot of promise in terms of demonstrating the validity of this approach with homeopathy. Have you ever read the book or heard of the book called Hidden Messages in Water?
No, I haven't.
It was a Japanese scientist, and actually it was really interesting because he would take photographs at a microscopic scale of water as he would freeze it. So he would put a label on the water with a certain idea or thought, like love or hate or things like that. What he found was when he would put a label on there like love on the water, that the energy of that thought would actually get infused into the water. So then when he would freeze the water, it would actually develop these really organized patterns as the water would freeze. And then as he would take the water out of jars with things like hate or anger, things like that, then it would create this really kind of chaotic pattern when it would freeze. So he found that even just infusing the water just with a thought would actually change the structure of how the water froze microscopically.
Right. So Dr. Emoto, I wasn't putting the name of the book with him, but yeah, I'm very familiar with that work.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was Dr. Emoto. So
yeah,
it reminds me of that, although homeopathy, I think, has a step further, because with the nanoparticles, that actually brings an element of, the physical element of whatever that was initially in the water is still present, even though it's broken down into this, nano scale. So it's easily absorbed by the body and still has an impact on the body.
Yeah, and the truth is we know so little about water. It's still a huge mystery to science. It seems to defy the laws of physics. And there's so much we don't understand about water. And same with like these nanoparticles or quantum particles. We don't know if they're actually the physical substance that's communicating with our bodies in some way, or if they're creating nanobubbles in the water, or electrical patterns, or I'm trying to remember what they were called. Coherence domains. There's all kinds of things that we're now measuring in homeopathic remedies, and we can actually start with some of the basic science that has been happening. We're actually able now to differentiate homeopathic remedy from just water. So we know they're different. We know they have different electromagnetic frequencies. We know, for example, Dr. Stephen Cartwright did a study using what are called polar dyes. I think they're, if I can pronounce it, sulfatochromic dyes. And these dyes are used in research because they respond to different electromagnetic fields, positive or negative. And they actually react in a homeopathic remedy where they don't react in a control. So there's so much out there for us still to learn, and so much out there that's going to inform our understanding of physics and biology. But we're closing ourselves up to it. There's so much research bias and a lack of funding for this kind of research that we're really limiting our future scientifically. And yeah, it's a little frightening.
Well, and the fact that our bodies are 70% water, you would think that scientists would be very curious to keep studying it. And one of the things about homeopathy that I think is just so mysteriously fascinating is the fact that the more that you dilute the remedy, the stronger it gets. Correct?
I wouldn't put it necessarily that way, but when we when we change the potency, which is how much it's been diluted and suppressed, it works on a different wavelength. So some people may respond better to specific potencies than others. Sometimes a lower potency can have a much stronger effect on someone, and for other people, it can be a higher potency. There's also really interesting basic research that's been done in labs that shows different resonances for different potencies. In Cuba, they were looking at a plant called moringa and its anti-tumoral properties, and they were making homeopathic remedies out of it. So they came to know very well at what potencies these remedies would affect cancer cells. Wow. And it wasn't at every potency, and every remedy seems to be a little different. So there's a lot for us to still learn there. Homeopathy, again, we're just scratching the surface with our knowledge of homeopathy itself. So that whole pathology question is a huge question.
Wow. I find it very interesting because my background is in science, and I find it interesting that science is supposed to be this field where the scientist is objective and impartial and open-minded, and yet so often we find that it is completely the opposite, especially when money gets involved, because like you mentioned, there seems to be this financial element where the corporations and the people who stand to make a profit from these things have the ability to shut off the money from flowing to areas where they don't want research to be done. And so then they funnel the money exactly where they want it, which even scientists who are interested in studying homeopathy find that there's no funding for them to be able to study homeopathy.
Mm-hmm. And the money is a huge issue. And as well, there's this bias in academia now, because you're not going to get the money. You're not going to research that. It's being ridiculed. There's a notion within your academic community that you shouldn't be studying such nonsense. And particularly if you're going to have a hard time publishing it, why would you study that? So there's a social bias that's preventing research, as well as the financial bias. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I thought it was so funny that you included in the documentary this very skeptical professor from McGill University who thought basically that homeopathy was a quack.
Mm-hmm.
And was that just to kind of show, that he really wasn't basing his idea or, his thought on anything. He just said, well, it's just quackery.
Yeah, and he's a professor of physics at McGill University. He runs a skeptic organization there. I'm trying to think about I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head right now. The Center for Science, and I don't know, for teaching people about how to think about science, and basically is what they're trying to do. But when you look at where their funding comes from, it's the Trottier Foundation. And this man who started this foundation sits on the board of a pharmaceutical company. He made his millions in cell phone technology, and you'll find videos by Joe Schwartz talking about how, cell phones don't really cause brain tumors. So there's this, I do believe that that he genuinely believes in what he's doing, but he won't look at the research that doesn't agree with what he believes in. And I would bring it to him. I asked him about all the studies we looked at in the film, and, he hadn't heard of any of them, first of all. And so if he claims to know so much about homeopathy and to have read all the research, he hasn't looked at any of our best research. And, confronted with it, he would just say things like, well, that's not possible. And that was it. That was the extent of his engagement.
Well, everything is safe right up until there's a lawsuit that proves it isn't, right? Like with glyphosates, we're seeing how that domino has fallen, and now the whole thing's going to start collapsing. And so it's like it's really interesting to me how many things have been called quackery and stuff. Like I think of Wagner when he was talking about plate tectonics, and the scientists at the time were saying that's preposterous. There's no way these continents could be floating around the earth. And yet the evidence just kept mounting and mounting and mounting. And finally everyone had to concede, wow, there really are plate tectonics, and the continents are actually just floating on this surface of the earth and moving around all over the place. Now there's a whole study of it. And it's just, when I look through the history of science, how many things have, people initially came out so strongly against it and said, that's preposterous. There's no way that's true. And then eventually, though, the truth comes out. And I'm just hoping that within my lifetime, I can see that with homeopathy.
I hope so too. And I mean, I'm thinking about such basic things like hand washing. I can't remember who the doctor was who said, maybe all these people are dying because we're going from one surgery to birth, and we're not cleaning our hands. We're bringing the dirt from one place to the other.
Exactly.
Oh, right. Germ theory. Yeah. I can't remember who that was off the top of my head, but yeah, germ theory. They thought that's insane. You're talking about little creatures that are so small, you can't even see them with your eyes. And so of course we now know, they're everywhere. In fact, there's far more bacteria than there are people on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'm wondering, is there a homeopathic remedy for skepticism and closed-mindedness?
Oh yeah, if there is, maybe we could sneak it into the water supply.
I don't know about that.
Well,
or at least offer it for free somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, now my husband and I, we work a lot in the schools, Ananda, and I'm looking at the kids. They are sickly. I mean, I remember growing up. I grew up in Michigan. And so I remember January, February, people would start getting colds. It was winter. Now, I've taught for 13 years in the past, and I occasionally go into schools and do work. Now, August, September, kids are coming down with colds. And I'm like, I don't remember kids getting sick in the fall. And of course, one of the huge problems in schools is the ADD. These kids can't pay attention. They're just hyper. They can't focus. So does homeopathy have a role to help these kids with all the issues they're dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. I work with a lot of children with a range of diagnoses, and it is a huge issue. I think the statistic is 1 in 4 children is on medication.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I believe it.
So yeah, there's a lot we can offer, and you can find a great homeopath in your area and go see them. I think it makes a huge difference in children's lives. And it's not just homeopathy, but also nutrition makes a big difference. Most of our food now is devoid of nutrients compared to what it was 20, 30 years ago, because our soils are nutrient deficient. So there's a few angles that we can take on that whole issue. But yeah, our health as a whole, as a society, is degrading significantly.
Speaking to natural health in general, I can say for myself, my mom always had me on the regular vaccine schedule, and it was far fewer vaccines than there are now, but I was sick all the time. I had this regular, you get sick, and then everybody's talking about, oh yeah, it's the flu season, it's the cold season, it's this season, it's that season, like everybody's supposed to be getting sick on cue. And so I went through, all the different childhood diseases, all these things, despite the vaccinations. And then as I started studying metaphysics, and I started giving more attention to my spirituality, and I started learning about health and healing. And so I started gradually shifting to eat more and more organic foods, eating unprocessed foods as much as possible, eliminating artificial colors, artificial flavors, preservatives. And intuitively, I just started feeling like I wanted to start moving away from that vaccine schedule. And I found that the further away that I got from anything pharmaceutical, that the healthier I became. And so, that's really something, if anybody wants to just do that experiment, do it for 30 days. And if you feel better, do it for another 30 days and just keep going with it. And over time, I believe that just about anybody will see a huge difference within just even 6 months or a year. You'll look back and you'll see that, you feel like a completely different person.
Mm-hmm. Like they spend so much time and energy on communicable diseases, and yet there's something here right in front of us, which is that we're feeding people carcinogens and toxins day after day after day, and no one's addressing any of that. Our household cleaners are like all these chemicals that we're consistently exposed to. Why aren't those simple things being addressed, that they can be quickly and easily addressed. We have all kinds of alternatives available to us. And yet they continue to sell it, to market it to children. You know, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and then we look at things as simple as the food pyramid. You know, it's really designed to support certain segments of our food industry more than it is actually to really support our long-term health.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things I've been looking at, because as Patrick said, you know, we do a lot with study of metaphysics and understanding the mind. And what I've noticed is that the people who do intense study, like, you know, to become a medical doctor, for example, you know, 8+ years, I think what it take a lot of what happens is the conscious mind becomes so dominant, the ego becomes so overpowering, it literally just shuts down the inner voice, the subconscious, or, you know, that part of ourselves that understands harmony, that understands how to work with earth, how to work with the body, the practical things. And so I think that's what's going on. And I think it really takes a special person who can do deep, intense study and still maintain contact, you know, with the spirit, whatever you want to call it, the soul, that really guides us and shows us the way to work naturally with the body and to work in harmony with the earth. And I wonder what, you know, your experience or what your thoughts are on that.
I actually think that a lot of physicians and medical doctors are a lot more open than we give them credit for, and that they're actually quite silenced by the system. They're not allowed to have these differing opinions or perspectives publicly, and they often don't. And I've met many of these people. There was a head of one pharmaceutical company who was like, I totally believe in homeopathy, I just can't say it publicly. I'll lose my job. I see that with doctors here in Canada who are threatened to lose their positions should they, you know, practice in an alternative manner openly. So I think there's that. The other thing I think is that the education system is highly funded by the pharmaceutical industry. What is being taught in medical school is limited to what has been approved by the pharmaceutical company. I had a good friend in university who was doing her, I think her master's or PhD in neurology, and she did a study on a specific drug that showed to be very harmful in people who smoked. And she wasn't allowed to publish her results. They told her that if she published her results, she would not get her degree. So she didn't publish. Wow. So I think there's a lot of manipulation, and in that way they're manipulating students' minds as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have separated reason from spirit in a way. We've which should be a holistic endeavor, has been split into its components.
Well, so to keep enlightening people, Ananda, because we're coming up to the end of the show, how can people get in touch with you? How can they see the movie and or do a showing of Magic Pills?
Yeah, so they can visit our website, magicpillsmovie.com. There's a contact page. You'll reach me directly. There's links to learn how to screen the film. Currently, the film is been shown at festivals and through community screenings, and we've set it up so that anyone can show the film. You sign up for a license. You can show it in your living room to your friends, or you can sign up and have a large screening in a theater or at your church or community center, school. We've had all kinds of different locations used to screen the film. So if you're interested, check that out. Send me an email, fill out the form there, and we should be, I think, either end of winter, beginning of spring, releasing the film online. So if you join us, our community online on Facebook or through the mailing list, you'll learn when all that's being released. But our real goal with the community is to grow a group of individuals who are willing to stand up for health freedoms, who will write letters, sign petitions. There's all kinds of actions needed, and we need people involved. And this is our way of communicating what's happening in the world of natural medicine.
Fantastic. I think we need that in this country too, desperately. So Ananda, thank you so much for being on with us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. It was really fun.
So we love having you with us. So please connect with us on Facebook at Spirits Journey Radio, and be sure to like our page so that we can be a part of your life and you can be part of ours. You can study with us or get a reading from us at intuitiveschool.com. This has been Spirits Journey on Truth Frequency Radio, simulcast on Oneness Talk Radio. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Catherine. Have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you next Saturday.
Goodbye for now.
Oneness Talk Radio. Hip, fresh, and fun. Discover your positivity portal 24/7 and experience unique talk radio from around the planet, perfectly mixed with music that enchants your soul. At a moment where everyone is being challenged to stay awake and release fear, OnenessTalkRadio.com is here to remind us all of our divine mastery. Imagine the activating power of intentional oneness and universal healing available at any time. With shows in multiple languages and formats, relax and explore. Our commitment to uplifting music from superstars and fresh talent, combined with your favorite shows, will inspire you to stay all day and soak in the gift of connection. Once you experience our signature oneness moment, in only 3 to 5 minutes, your heart will expand as miracles unfold. OnenessTalkRadio.com. One world, one voice. Expand your vision.